announced yesterday that we'll be including grocery scanner data in our headline measures of inflation from March, so that's February's index. So it's an exciting time for these important economic statistics. That's following changes that we've made, including incorporating new data for second-hand cars, rail fares, and rents, and steps we've taken to improve our systems at ONS, so move away from legacy platforms to strategic alternatives to future-proof the ongoing production of these important statistics. So today is a really good opportunity to take you through kind of recent developments, and it's also a good opportunity for you to ask questions as well about the upcoming changes. So I'd just like to start by covering some housekeeping. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So we will be recording today's session, and we will be circulating that recording early next week. There'll also be an opportunity, as I mentioned, to ask questions throughout the session. So you can submit these via Slido. There's the integrated Slido button at the top of your screen, the link in the chat box, or using the code #42283. We'll be picking up and collating the questions throughout the session, and then there'll be ample opportunity for ONS staff to respond to those questions and for us to have a discussion towards the end of the session. So moving on to the next slide. So I'll briefly cover the agenda. So I'll shortly hand over to Chris Payne, who will give you an overview of the work that we've been doing at ONS to transform our consumer price statistics. I'll then hand over to Liam Greenhoff, who'll take you through some of the new methods that we've developed to use these new data sources. Then Amy North, who will take you through the numbers that we published yesterday and the impact of incorporating grocery scanner data on our headline measures of inflation. I'll then hand over to Tony Cox, who's chair of the Inflation Statistics User Group, and Emily Mitchell as well for their session. And then at that point in time, I'll be working in the background with the team at ONS to collate all the questions that you've asked during the session, and we'll have an opportunity to respond to those questions, and there'll be plenty of time for discussion around 25 minutes, and then I'll briefly round up and close the session. So fairly packed agenda. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Chris to take us through the work we've been doing to transform our consumer price statistics.
Thanks, Mike. So my name's Chris Payne. I lead on some of the consumer prices continuous improvement work here at the Office for National Statistics. And I'm going to begin by just giving you a bit of an overview of the Prices Transformation project and the work we've done to date. So to begin with, just to give you an idea of what our range of consumer price inflation statistics look like. So here they are. CPI is the Consumer Prices Index. That's probably the one that's most familiar to many of you. It tends to be the measure that's commented on by the media. It's also the inflation target used by the Bank of England in monetary policy. But we also produce the CPIH, which extends the CPI framework to include a measure of owner-occupiers' housing costs. The use case for those is essentially an economic measure of inflation. They give a picture of how prices are changing across the economy. But we also have a set of measures that try and aim to reflect how households experience more. And that's the household cost indices. Those are currently in development. They're experimental measures, but they focus on the inflationary experience of different groups of the population, so different income deciles, for example. And then the final measure, which may perhaps be more familiar, is the RPI. This is essentially a legacy measure that has existing uses in lots of gilts and contracts, and we're required to produce it by law, but we discourage users from using it for new purposes. The changes that we're talking about will be going into all of these measures from February 2026's index, published in March. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just to give an overview of the project, first of all, what are the aims of the project? So we're looking at bringing in new alternative data sources to measure inflation. One of those would be scanner data. Scanner data is data collected by retailers as products are sold, whether in store or online, but there are other big administrative sources that we're looking at as well. Big data come with big challenges, so part of the project is also around looking at researching and bringing in new methods to process that data, dealing with some of the particular issues that come with big data. Liam will talk more about that in his section next. We also need the systems and processes to be able to handle that volume of data. So as part of the project, we've also been implementing a new cloud-based processing platform that will allow us to produce consumer price inflation statistics in a sustainable way. It will allow us to bring in further new data sources in future at pace as well. So there are a number of aims. The chart on the right-hand side shows the weight of each expenditure category in CPI. So these are COICOP divisions, and the coloured bars within the grey bars show you how much of the weight of CPIH we're transforming. So you can see the transformation has been focused, in the early part was focused around the transport category, where we've transformed about 2.4% of the data sources there. The rental prices, which are about 21% of CPIH, that because the rental prices feed into the measure of owner occupiers housing costs as well. But this year we're delivering transform methods for grocery scanner data, and that's about 12% of the CPIH basket. And we have data for 50% of the groceries market, so I would expect the transformation to cover about half of that weight. The rental prices obviously have a very big weight in CPIH because of the measure of owner occupiers housing costs. I think the equivalent figure for CPI is sort of nearly a sixth of the measure. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So in terms of what we do at the moment, these are the existing ways that we collect data. So we have what's referred to as our local collection, which is about half of the basket by weight. This is where we outsource price collection to a third party. They send price collectors out into the field. They visit a sample of locations around the country, sample stores within each location, and try and collect representative prices, which feed into the calculation. This allows us to capture regional price variation. I think there's a large proportion of that local collection can't be transformed. If you think about sort of local butchers, greengrocers, that kind of thing, we're not going to be able to get scanner data from them. So there's always an element of regional variation that we need to capture. They operate a monthly point-in-time price collection. So they visit stores on what's referred to as index day, which is the second or third Tuesday of every month, and they collect prices on that date. And we track the change in those prices month by month. The remaining half of the basket is what we call central collections. So these are prices collected in-house by ONS staff. There's elements of regional pricing within that, but a lot of the collection is also based on a sort of organisations that have a national pricing policy, so we can collect one price point. Those prices are collected manually off the internet, by phone, and we also get some administrative data. And again, that's a monthly point-in-time collection. So a lot of the scanner data that we're getting is replacing these collections. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is what we've delivered so far. So the first area of the basket that we transformed was rail fares in 2023. We have a data source from the Rail Delivery Group, which covers all transactions across Great Britain. Bringing that data in has allowed us to publish more granular estimates of inflation. So whereas before we just published a rail fares index, now we can actually publish indices by ticket type. We followed up with used cars in 2024. So this is data that we get from Auto Trader, which covers a large part of the used car market. We introduced that new data source in 2020-24, and we followed up within the same year. We improved our measure of private rentals. So for private rentals, we get data from the Valuation Office Agency and other devolved administrations. And in 2024, we transformed the way we use that data so that we could take advantage of more of the data and capture better estimates there. Followed up in 2025 with similar improvements to the Northern Ireland data. Last year in 2025, we delivered our new cloud-based processing system. And this was a big win for us because that essentially future-proofs the production of consumer price inflation, but it also gives us the functionality to allow us to process large data sources such as these. And the sort of first key delivery in that regard is the grocery scanner data, which we aim to introduce in March. And we're doing that for 50% of the groceries market. If we could have the next slide, please. Okay. So I just wanted to share this quote from Mike's blog that went out yesterday. So I think this kind of highlights the scale of the improvements that we're making. So this process involves replacing 25,000 monthly price points recorded on mobile devices by price collectors with 300 million price points derived from sales of over 1 billion units of products. So I just wanted to share that to give a sense of the scale of the change here. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So what are the benefits of incorporating scanner data? So bringing in scanner data allows us to improve the accuracy of how we measure consumer price inflation, improves the efficacy of our processes, and means that the data are more representative of what consumers are buying. So there's a few points here to sort of walk through. Firstly, I talked a bit about the local collection, where we draw a sample of locations and a sample of outlets within each location, and then identify a sort of identitive price quote or quotes to follow for each item within those stores. Bringing in grocery scanner data means that we have data for all products sold in all of the stores for every retailer that contributes. So we have much more data that can give us a much more accurate representation of what people are buying. The second advantage that I've got here is that we now have the average price paid over the month. So rather than relying on a point in time price collection, just collecting prices at one point in the month on index day, we actually know the average price paid across the whole month. We actually take 3 weeks of data from the month given the delivery schedule, but our analysis suggests that that is representative of the average price paid across the whole month. So we know the actual average price that people are paying rather than just the sort of ticket price in the shop. We also now know for the first time what the expenditure patterns look like at the very first stage of aggregation. So historically, when price collectors collect prices from the shop, they use a degree of judgment, market knowledge, working with the retailers to understand and price something that's representative of what people buy, but we don't know what actual consumer expenditure is for, say, Granny Smith apples in one store relative to Pink Lady apples in another store. What the scanner data gives us is very detailed information on which products people are buying more of. So that allows us to introduce weights at the very first stage of aggregation, which historically we haven't been able to do. The new data also helps us to better inform the narrative around what's driving inflation. So we've got more data to understand why we see the inflationary effects that we do. So you can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I took one of the advantages that I referenced was that we've now got data for all of the prices in all of the stores. So that has necessitated a change in the way that we structure the data. So historically, on the left-hand side of the chart there, we've got a list of historical items within the rice Quick Op 5 category. So historically, what we would have done is identified a sample of representative items. So we've got basmati rice, microwavable rice, and rice cakes. But implicitly within that, there are other rice products that we haven't been capturing, and we assume that the prices of those rice products change in the same way as other things. But we didn't want to limit ourselves with the scanner data to only capturing the price change of those items. So what we've done is we've created broader consumption segments, which effectively capture all of the rice products within the scanner data. So that covers the 3 items in the chart here, but also everything else as well. And that allows us to make use of all the data that we have. We can move on to the next slide, please. Okay. In terms of the data publication, so the bulletin focuses on the COICOP levels. This is an international classification structure basically, but there are 5 levels of detail in our publications. So we'll now be able to publish improved estimates of inflation for the groceries categories within that structure. Alongside the bulletin, we also publish some supplementary data to aid analysts who want to try and understand what's happening with the higher level estimates. So historically, those have been item indices, now consumption segment indices. We've also published the price quote microdata from the local field collection and some of the other collections that we operate. Because of the non-disclosure agreements that we've got with retailers and because of the sheer size and scale of the scanner data, we won't be able to publish the groceries price quote microdata from March 2025. We've been engaging with users on this for a period of time. So we ran a user feedback survey in late 2024 to try and understand how users were using the microdata, to look at new products that we could develop to allow those existing users to continue. And some of the respondents to that survey participated in some focus groups in late 2020-25, where we highlighted some of the approaches that we've been developing to get some more feedback and to try and identify whether there are any gaps. So yesterday we published an article outlining the new supplementary outputs that we intend to publish to support existing users of the microdata. And on the next slide, we've got a summary of what those products are. So from March 2026, we're aiming to have publication of regional consumption segment indices ready. So a lot of the user feedback was around trying to use the data to understand regional inflation dynamics, perhaps constructing regional special aggregates. So what we've done, essentially, we have a regional layer of aggregation that sits below consumption segment, and from March, we're going to publish those regional consumption segment indices with their weights so that users can understand inflation dynamics in the regions. We're also publishing counts of the indicator markers and proportions. So for the locally collected data, this is in the price quote microdata set, there are markers that tell us when things are on sale or when they're recovering, when things are not available, or when they've been replaced. So we'll be providing counts of those markers to users as well. We've then got a few further improvements that we'll follow up with in the summer. So we have a shopping prices comparison tool that allows users to see the average prices of different products across the basket. Because the definitions of consumption segments are broader than for items, there are a lot of prices that we've had to discontinue in that comparison tool at the moment. But what we've actually been able to do is to capture item level average prices within the scanner data. And so we'll be able to publish more detail on the shopping prices comparison tool from the summer, and support some of the more analytical users in terms of understanding the drivers of the inflation rate. We're also going to publish some distributional information on both the price levels in the data and the price relatives, so changing prices. So that will enable users to understand what the kind of drivers of different areas of the basket are. Can move on to the next slide, please. This slide just touches on some of the user engagement and the quality assurance that we've done across the process. So firstly, we've been working with external partners extensively throughout the process to ensure that our methods follow sort of best practice and are as good quality as they can be. That's involved various different avenues. So we have worked with our advisory panels. So we have 2 advisory panels that support us. One is a technical panel of international and domestic experts in prices. The other is a panel of prices stakeholders. And so we've consulted them throughout the process and sought their advice on new methods, presentation of data, that kind of thing. We've also worked with our Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence to review our processes and what we've done. And we have also consulted internationally with other NSIs to understand how they're dealing with scanner data. So we've done lots of external engagement to give us assurance that on what we're doing. We've used this year to do a parallel run of the grocery scanner data. So last year we delivered all of the functionality that we needed to process scanner data. But after engaging with our advisory panels, we decided that we would use this year to parallel run the grocery scanner data before going live. This has meant that we've been able to identify a number of improvements to the system and the processing of the data to further assure the quality of that data. And then finally, we regularly engage with the data suppliers that are contributing scanner data and other big data sources to ensure that we have an ongoing supply of quality data and that we have an uninterrupted supply of data in the future. And so we're building good relationships there to ensure that we have a supply of data. We do have contingency plans in place to deal with any disruption to service, but we don't anticipate that happening, and there were no issues over the parallel run. Next slide, please. So just finally from me, these are the publications that went out yesterday announcing our intention to go live in March and providing some support to users. We'll post them in the chat for you, but a lot of the content there is going to be covered by Liam and Amy in their later sessions. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That's all very clear. So I'll now hand over to Liam Greenhoff, who's going to take us through the new methods that have been developed to use scanner data. Over to you, Liam.
Hey, so I'm Liam Greenhoff. I'm the head of Consumer Prices Methods Transformation. So I've worked on the methods for introducing scanner data for a number of years now. I'll take you through some of those methods and put them in a bit of context as well. So if we go on to the first slide of the presentation. So for the first slide, I want to focus a bit on the index methodology. So I want to distinguish between two types of index calculations. The first is what we call elementary aggregation. So think of the banana prices. So you collect some prices potentially off shelves in kind of our local collection data, or prices within a scanner data set. You collect some banana prices and you measure a banana aggregate, so like a measure of inflation of the bananas. That is what we call elementary aggregation. We're combining prices and measuring the price change of those prices over time to calculate an aggregate. Higher level aggregation is then when you combine aggregates together to get even higher level aggregates. So for example, once you've performed elementary aggregation on both the banana prices and the grape prices to get banana and grape aggregates, we then use higher level aggregation to combine banana and grape aggregates into a fruit aggregate, for example. This was just illustrative, not a real example from our data. So if we go into the next table, so I want to compare what's changed as a result of the introduction of scanner data. So in our elementary aggregation, which is where we combine prices into price indices. So with the kind of traditional or the local collection data, we use point-in-time prices. So that's where, for a product, we might have a price collector walk into a shop, a particular outlet, and collect a price for a product directly off the shelf. This might mean that that product is represented by that single price within a particular outlet, at a particular point in time. Compare that to scanner data where we use unit value. So unit value, so consider that we've got potentially for that product different prices at different outlets and at different times of the month. A unit value aggregates all of that together to give you an actual average price paid by the consumer. So we take all the expenditures and quantities over all of the outlets and at all times in the month, up to the 3 weeks that we talked about, and we take an average of that, giving you a genuine average price paid by the consumer. Also comparing the weights, so our kind of local or traditional data, we don't have weights typically. There may be 1 or 2 instances where we have exceptions, but for the most part, we don't have weights at the elementary level. With scanner data, we are able to calculate expenditure shares. So an expenditure share would be the proportion of sales on that product. But importantly, we're also able to produce contemporary expenditure shares. So the expenditure share we calculate pertains to the current month. So if the price is £1.57 for a bunch of grapes, then the expenditure share pertains to the £1.57 within that month, not to some historic period. So in traditional data for CPI and CPIH, we use Jevons and Juto, and for the RPI, we use Carley and Juto for the most part. These are unweighted index methods because we lack weights at the elementary level. With scanner data, we're able to take advantage of these unit values, this dynamic market, and these contemporary expenditure shares, and we're able to introduce a Gex-Tongvist, which I will talk about a bit in future slides. So then if we continue on to higher aggregation, next table. So with higher level aggregation, nothing has changed. So with the introduction of scanner data, we're still using the same methods we've always used. So the prices, or the kind of the price inputs into the method, are your lower level aggregates. So for example, in the example on the left, it'd be the banana aggregate and the grape aggregate. The weights come from National Accounts, Living Costs and Food Survey, and the variety of other data sources we use, and typically come from a historic period, which we price update to the current period, which means as a result, we use the low index method, which is often described as a fixed basket method. So none of this has changed with the introduction of scanner data. Everything continues as is with regards to high-level aggregation. So if we continue on to the next slide, please. So just going to go through a range of advantages using the scanner and Gex-ToNVist. So the first advantage is more products per aggregate. So because the scanner data is automatically collected, we have available to us every product that the retailer sells for that goods type, so we can just introduce everything. With traditional data, we are limited by the capacity of our price collectors, so we can just introduce more products as a result of scanner data. Second advantage is that we can produce more representative price. So I've talked a bit about this for unit values. Instead of collecting one price at a point in the month, at a single outlet, we can look at every outlet that the retailer has, look at every day in the 3-week average that we use, and calculate a unit value for that. So we're picking up the greater range of experience from the consumer. So if there's different prices at different points of the month, we're able to capture that. Third advantage is we can use the weights, so we can produce a weighted index method at the elementary level, and as I mentioned, those weights are contemporary. Moving on to the fourth advantage, we can better reflect discounting. So because we were collecting one price per month, what we wouldn't know is, so if we were to collect like a discriminatory discount, so for example a loyalty card price, what we wouldn't know before is the take-up rate associated with the loyalty card, but the scanner data gives us the information we need to know what proportion of people are able to experience a discount as a result of a loyalty card, so we can better reflect the consumer experience by introducing unit values. Moving on to the fifth advantage, we can better reflect dynamic markets, which I will come on to in the next couple of slides. And the final advantage is automated collection, as I mentioned before. So as a result of having these automated data feeds, we can collect the data automatically, which allows us to experience the other advantages I talked about before. Moving on to the next slide. So what I want to give an idea of is what is the Gex-ToNVist measuring. So I'm going to start with describing what a fixed basket is. So consider two examples of a fixed basket. The first on the left involves a basket which involves 4 apples, 1 bunch of grapes and 2 bananas. We collect the price of that basket in January, which is £4, and we collect it again in July, which is £4.40, and we see that there's been a 10% increase. We now consider a second basket where we change the quantities. We instead use 3 apples, 2 bunches of grapes and 3 bananas. We measure the price of £5 in January and £5 in July. So this basket represents no change. So the question is, which of the basket is better? Why would we believe one basket over another? If we move on to the next bit. So what we need is a basket to represent what consumers purchase. So we do this through expenditure surveys. So in the kind of higher level indices, we have expenditure surveys telling us what people are purchasing, and we can make sure the basket represents what consumers are purchasing. Now, because we're comparing January and July, there are 2 very natural baskets to consider. One is where we set the weights based on the January weights. The second is where we set the weights based on the July weights. If we use January weights, we get a L'Espèce. If we use July weights, we get a Pâche. And if we believe that those 2 are equally reasonable, it might be reasonable then to take a geometric average of the 2, in which case we get a Fisher index. Now, what tends to happen is the L'Espèce tends to produce a higher index than the Fisher, and the Fisher tends to produce a higher index than the Pâche. So if we move on to the next bit. So in general, the earlier the weights, the higher the index. So generally we get L'Espèce gives a higher index than the Fisher, and the Fisher higher the index than the Pâche. So the question is, how does the GECS Turnquist relate to all of this, the index method we're using for scanner data? So if we move on to the next slide. So the GECS Turnquist results generally are close to the Fisher. So yesterday we released a publication where I compared the GECS Turnquist against some of these methods. And what we see is that the GECS Turnquist is generally quite close to the Fisher. So it can be kind of understood as a basket index, approximating a basket index, which uses both the base and the measurement period's weight symmetrically, as in it's an average of the two natural baskets. So if we move on to the next bit. However, there's a caveat that the GECS Turnquist better captures product dynamism. So what I mean by that, so if we move on to the next bit, what I mean by that is that the real world isn't quite a fixed basket. So if we consider the table in the bottom right, so suppose a scenario where product 1 is available from January to March, product 2 is available in January and February, and product 3 is available in February and March. The real world is not a fixed basket. There are products that emerge into the market and leave the market. A Fisher index, which compares January and March, would only be able to reflect product 1. It would only be able to capture the influence of product 1, since product 2 drops in March and doesn't have a price in March, and product 3 appears in February, so doesn't have a price in January. So if we were to calculate a Fisher index and said that was our benchmark, it wouldn't capture the influence that products 2 and 3 are having in the market. A GECS Turnquist, on the other hand, which compares January and March, would be able to capture the influence of products 2 and 3, because the GECS Turnquist captures the influence of how prices evolve over the period between January and March. So although on an aggregate level, GECS Turnquist and Fisher generally produce reasonably similar results, the GECS Turnquist can be influenced by dynamic products and their influence over price change in the long run. So then if we move on to the next slide. So all of these methods, the GECS Turnquist and scanner data, because they are a lot of data and a lot of computations, it would not be feasible to do this in our kind of traditional spreadsheets. What we need is a scalable, reproducible analytical pipeline. So this is a framework that we've worked our pipelines towards. So we've developed what we call the process pipeline, where the scanner data has some various pre-processing done to it before we calculate the GECS Turnquist indices. And our traditional or local collection data also have modules where we apply some pre-processing, calculate the traditional indices, and then these GECS Turnquist indices and these traditional indices, which form the elementary aggregation that I mentioned before, then goes through a higher level aggregation module to produce our output indices. So because we've got billions of rows of data in our scanner data, all of this is done in Python, and it's done programmatically. We've followed the framework, so a lot of testing has gone into this pipeline, for example. In this presentation, I've focused a bit on the GECS Turnquist methods. So if we move on to the next bit, please. And I focused on the GECS Turnquist methods, but there are a lot of methods that go into the pre-processing, such as strata selection, how we define a product, how we calculate a unit value, how we perform outlier detection, and how we perform relaunch linking. So relaunch linking is how we capture the influence of, for example, shrinkflation. All of this I've presented in previous papers, so there's I didn't have time to cover all of these methods in today's presentation, but there's a lot of publications that we've developed over time that covers all of these methods. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So I've put them all in this slide. So when the slides get circulated after this presentation, if you want to read about any of the other methods that we've developed, everything's available in this slide. Yeah, it's there's full audit trail there. I think that's my slides.
Thanks, Liam. And I'd encourage everyone to explore the links that Liam provided on the slides. Liam's done an excellent job of explaining kind of GEXT in plain English. I personally found that particular paper really helpful. Just a reminder to keep on submitting your questions via Slido. I think we're up to nearly 20 so far, so I'm sure there'll be a good discussion in the Q&A section. But I'll now hand over to Amy to go through the latest data that we've published.
Thank you, Mike. Pleasure to be here today. My name is Amy North, and I am the Head of Business Change and Implementation team at ONS. Our team is the one who've been working on bringing grocery scanner data into our consumer price inflation statistics, along with our colleagues from other teams, such as what we've heard from the other speakers today. Yesterday, we published an impact analysis article, and today I will summarise the key findings that we presented in that article, showing the latest analysis gauging the expected impact of introducing groceries scanner data into our suite of consumer price inflation statistics from the publication on the 25th of March 2026. Next slide, please. So there are multiple possible reasons for us to expect differences in our inflation statistics calculated using grocery scanner data versus excluding scanner data using the current approach that we use at the moment. And these include things like product coverage, which is so the existing local collection or that we use collects a sample of products, for example, the most popular products, which could be done by anticipating what has the most shelf space or using retailer or market knowledge of the most popular products. Whereas scanner data covers almost all products with expenditure. It looks at the products that people pay at the till and the price that they pay at the till point. There's also differences in temporal coverage. So in our existing collection, we collect on one day of the month, but in contrast, scanner data is collected throughout the month. So we have a much larger temporal coverage in scanner data. Spatially as well, we have larger coverage. So in our current collection, prices are collected from a sample of stores in a given region, but scanner data captures the prices across all the retailer stores. So we have better spatial coverage. My colleagues have just been explaining the difference in the index methodologies being used for scanner data as well. And another one on here is promotions and discounts. So our existing collection does include some types of promotions. For example, if there's a 25% reduction on a given product on the shelf price, so then that would apply to anyone purchasing that property, then we include that. But discounts which everyone isn't necessarily automatically eligible for, such as multi-buy discounts or loyalty scheme discounts, we can't include those in our current collection because we don't know who takes up that offer and who doesn't. So as part of our quality assurance work that was done in 2025, we assessed impacts at the more granular consumption segment level, as well as at headline level. And for the consumption segments we investigated, the case studies we looked at suggested that one of the main drivers for impacts on CPI, CPIH and RPI from including scanner data was from discounting and the increased coverage we have for that in scanner data. Next slide, please. So looking at the impact on our headline statistics, so looking at consumer price inflation, including owner-occupied housing costs first, CPIH, between January 2020 and June 2025, the headline CPIH annual inflation rate would have been unchanged in 28 of 66 months investigated. We looked at a little over about 6.5 years of data in this analysis. It would have been 0.1 percentage points higher in 17 months and 0.1 percentage points lower in 21 of those months. And the average impact on the CPIH annual rate of change over that 6.5 year period was on average 0.02 percentage points lower when scanner data was included. However, the impact of grocery scanner data wasn't consistent, as I've just said. It varied in direction, sometimes upwards, sometimes downwards. So looking a little bit more closely, in 2020 and 2021, scanner data on average increased CPIH by 0.1 percentage points rounded to 1 decimal place in 13 of those 24 months in 2020 and 2021. And research by the Institute of Fiscal Studies indicated that a reduction in promotions was likely an important driver of inflation in the early stages of the coronavirus pandemic. And since scanner data better accounts for discounts like multi-buys and loyalty scheme discounts, whereas the existing collection we use does not, a reduction in discount prevalence would be better captured in the scanner data and would have contributed to a higher annual growth rate. So this impact that we're observing here likely reflects the better representation for product discounts in our scanner data compared with our current collection. Over the next couple of years, between January 2022 and September 2024, the introduction of grocery scanner data would have led to a lower CPIH inflation rate, 0.1 percentage points lower, rounded to one decimal place, in a majority of months. And this may be explained by consumers switching to purchase goods with lower rates of inflation during this period, or possibly by increased customer use of loyalty scheme discounts in this period, which increased in prevalence over the last several years. Either of those would be better captured in the scanner data than in the existing data collection and methods, and would be expected to lead to a downwards push on inflation as observed in this period. In the most recent periods, from October 2024 to June 2025, the impact on headline CPIH has been smaller, with the unchanged headline rate in 5 of 9 months. And during that period, the average inflation rate for the monthly inflation rate was identical to 3 decimal places, 0.398%, for both the CPIH series with scanner data and without scanner data. And so this means that the small average increase in the headline annual rate from the inclusion of scanner data, 0.01 percentage points in Jan to June 2025, was mainly because scanner data had reduced monthly inflation the year before and actually had very little impact in the most recent months on the monthly inflation rate. So we're seeing something we call a base effect. Next slide, please. Similar trends were observed for CPI as well, as might be expected. So the headline CPI annual rate would have been unchanged in 27 of 66 months, 0.1 percentage points higher in 13 months, and lower in 26 months. The annual rate of change for CPI was on average 0.03 percentage points lower when we introduced grocery scanner data. And the impact of scanner data on the CPI annual rate was very similar to that observed for CPIH on the previous slide, but there was a slight difference, 0.02 percentage points for CPIH versus minus 0.03 percentage points in CPI. So using the highest precision level, the unrounded data, in every monthly period, the impact on CPI was always in the same direction as the impact on CPIH and of greater magnitude than in CPIH. So i.e. the impact of including grocery scanner data was always slightly larger in CPI than in CPIH. And this was as expected, since the weight for groceries is a bit larger in CPI than in CPIH, because the latter includes weights for owner-occupier housing costs. Next slide, please. So although, so this chart shows the food and non-alcoholic beverages and the alcoholic beverages and tobacco divisions, and the chart shows the contribution those had to the difference between the annual inflation rate for CPIH or CPI from including grocery scanner data. And you can see from this chart that although both these categories, both food and non-alcoholic beverages and alcoholic beverages and tobacco, contributed to the differences in the headline annual rate for CPIH, the contribution of the food and non-alcoholic beverages to the difference in the annual rate we were observing was larger. And this, again, is in line with our expectations, given that the weight for this category is more than twice that for alcoholic beverages and tobacco. Placing the CPIH and CPI charts here side by side, you can more easily see that this observation, this pattern was also true for CPI, where food and non-alcoholic beverages was the largest contributor for CPI as well. As expected, the impacts were very similar between CPIH and CPI. And another thing you can see from these charts is the directional impact of each of these categories tended to be in a given direction for a sustained period of time before switching directional impact. So, for example, the food and non-alcoholic beverages, which is the dark blue bars on this chart, pushed the annual inflation rate higher in the majority of months when grocery scanner data were included in 2020 and 2021. But in the middle of the period analysed, 2022 to 2024, this category tended to push the annual inflation rate lower, and similar was true in CPI. And you can see in the last several months of this series that from October 2024, the contributions to the difference in the CPIH annual rate and CPI annual rate were generally smaller and were a mixture of upwards and downwards impacts for both of these categories. And this led to a smaller impact on the headline annual rate, which we observed in the previous two slides at headline level. Next slide, please. So in the previous charts, we saw the food and non-alcoholic beverages division tended to have an impact in a consistent direction for a period of time. And we saw the same thing at the more granular level of the CPIH food group. Most classes tended to contribute to the difference in the annual rate in a consistent direction for a sustained period. So for example, in the last year of this analysis, so between July 2024 and June 2025, the bread and cereals category, which is the dark blue bars, and the meat classes, which is the light blue bars, generally had upwards contributions to the difference in the CPIH annual rate for the food index. But in contrast, in the previous 12-month period between July 2023 and June 2024, the opposite was true. Bread and cereals and the meat classes generally had downwards contributions to the CPIH annual rate for food. Next slide, please. So here's a quick summary of what's next for us. So the big one is the 25th of March 2026. On that release date, we will be publishing our Consumer Price Statistics monthly bulletin, which will include the February 2026 data, and which will be the first of our monthly statistical bulletins where grocery scanner data will be incorporated in our index. We will also be publishing the usual annual update to the Consumer Price Inflation Weights article and the update for the basket of goods and services. In March, we will also be updating our Consumer Price Inflation Technical Manual to update it with the changes that we've been describing today. And also from March, we are going to launch the new aggregated outputs that my colleague Chris Payne was outlining earlier, which will start with the regional consumption segment indices and indicator marker analysis outputs. And then later in the year, we plan to follow that on, expanding that aggregate outputs to include the remaining three. We'll also be publishing the usual annual update to our consumer prices development plan. Now I'll hand back over to Mike.
Thanks, Amy. That was all very clear. So moving on, so we'll now welcome Tony and Emily for the next presentation.
Hello, yes, I'm Tony Cox and I chair the Inflation Statistics User Group. I just wanted to take a few moments to encourage people to join the new Stats User Network. A number of you may remember the old Stats Usernet, SUN as it was called, in which there was a lively debate about statistical matters related to price indices. And we're really looking to resume that lively debate on the new Stats User Network. This is intended to be a wider user community format for people to join and pose their questions and get some answers about the new developments in price statistics. So if you're not already registered, I'd encourage you to register to the new network. And once there, if you scroll down and look for the prices in inflation section or group, you can then join in the debate. So with that, I'll hand over to Emily.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Mitchell, and I work in the ONS External Affairs team. So we're responsible for running Stats User Network. I'm going to talk to you briefly today a little bit about what it is and some of the benefits of joining the site. So as Tony touched on, it's an online discussion forum that allows users and producers of official statistics to engage on all aspects of statistics and statistics production. So by signing up to the site, you can engage with the latest statistical productions, you can hear about upcoming events, and read the latest blogs on statistical topics that interest you. So the site is Government Statistical Service branded, and it's funded and maintained by the ONS for the benefit of all users of official statistics. It is targeted at more informed users, but it's open for anyone to sign up and join. So the site is split into different groups, meaning that you can focus on the topics that interest you the most. And within these groups, you can create posts and comments and connect with other users of official statistics. If we can go to the next slide, please, Steve. So what are the benefits of Stats User Network? As I mentioned, the statistical themed groups, which allow you to discuss information that's important to you with colleagues in other organisations. This enables us to join up more and work in less siloed ways. It also offers the opportunity to continue a conversation after an event has finished, which is great to be able to, keep the momentum going and keep people connected. It's also a great place to hear about the latest statistical publications related to your area of interest. If we can go to the next slide, please, Steve. So yeah, as I mentioned, the site is split into groups based on statistical themes. So this slide highlights the prices and inflation theme group that those of you on this call might be interested in joining. Yeah, there's a number of different groups available. You can join any depending on which topics interest you. You can join as many or as few as you like, but you must join at least one group in order to be able to create content. And then the posts from the groups that you follow will appear in your latest content feed. So yeah, it's important that you join groups in order to access what people are publishing. If we can go to the final slide, please, Steve. Yeah, so we're really keen to broaden the site's user base and increase the engagement. We hold monthly demonstrations on how to use the site and how to get the best out of it. So if you're interested in learning more, please do come along to one of those sessions. My colleague Nathan will pop the link in the meeting chat for you to sign up. The next event is taking place on the 26th of February. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks, Tony, as well. So we've now got to the Q&A section of the webinar. So we have upwards of 30 questions to get through. So thanks, everyone, for submitting those questions. It's really good kind of engagement. So the first question, is there any work being done on attempting to reduce index day related volatility? For example, taking several monthly points for airfares. So at ONS, we are continually reviewing the basket of goods and services, and we published yesterday some changes that we're making to computer games and to hotels to increase the amount of data that we're collecting, and we are reviewing all items in the basket. So that'll be a decision for us. Airfares will obviously be part of that review that we'll be considering kind of moving forwards. So, a number of options available to us. One is, what we've done with hotels and computer games, where we just increase the collection to have better coverage, or we could use alternative data sources as well. And both are under consideration for all parts of the basket as we aim to improve kind of quality across the entire basket. So hopefully that answers question 1. So moving on to question 2. So in some countries, such as the Czech Republic, scanner data led to a lot of volatility in food prices. Can you comment on the volatility in food prices with the new method? I think Amy and Liam were going to answer that particular question. Who wants to go first?
Yeah.
Oh,
Niamh,
sorry,
you wanna go?
sorry, you go, me.
Okay. Yes. Oh, sorry, everyone's. The impact analysis that I showed showed the food group contributions to the annual rate, and you can see in there that, for example, the meat category contributes upwards for a sustained period of time and then switches direction and contributes downwards for a period of time. We didn't observe a given category flip-flopping every month being different, so I don't think we're expecting the index to be any more volatile than the current index using the current data and methods. Kim?
Yeah, and also, so there's two forms of volatility worth talking about. So one is volatility as a result of sampling error. Now, because we're now able to capture a census and with weights, we expect volatility as a result of sampling error to reduce. But however, the real world can be volatile. So like in our lowest level aggregates, there may be situations where the indices are volatile as a result of the real world being volatile. So for example, if a particular brand who is very dominant within a particular food group, if they were to put all of their products on a discount, they discounted their entire line, then that might influence the index quite strongly. But that's a genuine result of behaviour in the market. So I think being able to distinguish both of those is quite important. What I'd say is scanner data helps with both, so it helps to reduce the sampling volatility whilst capture the genuine price and expenditure shift volatility.
Thanks both. So we'll now move on to the next question. So does the 3-week average of data apply to both RPI and CPI and CPIH, or just CPI and CPIH?
The answer is yes. It will affect all three.
Sorry, I'm moving between screens. So moving on to question 4. So this is around, I'm interested to understand the monthly costs of cloud-based system and the security arrangements. So in terms of the system itself, we're using Google Cloud Platform. The costs associated with kind of using large data can be notable. But what I would say is that there are a number of key benefits for us as an organization. So being able to use this platform has allowed us to kind of move away from using legacy technology. Often that can be quite expensive to maintain. It also gives us the possibility of reducing our in-store collection as well. So that's something we will need to discuss with the provider that is responsible for collecting prices on our behalf. There are also benefits in terms of processes, so that the system that we've developed isn't just for scanner data, it's for the local collection data as well. And a lot of the quality assurance processes that are now in place are much more efficient. So we're realizing some savings there. So it's difficult to put a number on it. But it's not just an increase in cost for using these new data sources. There are numerous benefits for the organization as well in terms of cost reduction. And what I would say is as well, even if there is a slight increase in overall kind of costs of using these new data sources, we're getting much better value for money. So, these data sources are enormous, much better coverage, and we're producing, much better quality, more granular consumer price statistics as a consequence of using these new large data sources. So there's a value for money aspect of this, as well as just kind of the direct costs. Hopefully that answers that particular question. So moving on to the next, will there still be national level consumption segment indices outputs, or sorry, questions?
I think that was for the consumption segment indices.
That's it, me.
Yeah, the answer is yes, that will still continue to be available. And my colleague Chris outlined the new aggregate outputs we're planning to publish later in this year, which included the regional consumption segment indices.
Perfect. The next question, why are we being told about the system rather than being shown examples? Hopefully that was asked kind of earlier on in the webinar, and Amy presented the impact analysis to address that particular question. Moving on to question 8, does the change from a single reference day for prices to an average of 3 weeks make any difference? Have you compared both within the scanner data set?
Yes, thank you for that. So good question. So we haven't done that exact analysis for a single day compared with weeks of scanner data, but we have explored the prices from the retailers that we have scanner data for against the existing local collection data, and we have published some the impact analyses recently about the inclusion of scanner data. We also published an article that was looking at scenarios of whether we use 3 weeks of scanner data or 4 weeks and so on. And we've done testing to make sure that if we only had available 2 weeks of data, for example, that our systems would still be robust and our indices would be reliable.
Thanks, Amy. So moving on to the next question. Is the new method of broader segments able to distinguish between consumers trading up, mix changing towards more expensive rice versus actual price changes?
Yeah, I can take this one. So the bedrock of the GEX list is the price relative. So a price relative involves comparing the price of a product against itself in an earlier period. So where, like, if, for example, an expensive product and a cheap product were to share the same product code and be considered the same product, that might happen, but that isn't what happens in our data. Like, each products are defined by unique identifiers, which split different products out into different different observations that we measure the price change in those observations independently, and then we aggregate that to form the price index. So that shouldn't be a feature of our indices.
Brilliant, thanks, Liam. Next question, can you provide more information on the sample of scanner data used? You mentioned 50%, but is that 50% of all supermarkets? Does it also include small shops? So all we can say is that the scanner data we have covers 50% of the market. The reason we can't say any more is because the retailers that are providing data to us have asked not to be named. What I will say is, for the retailers that we do not have scanner data for, we are still collecting prices for those retailers, just kind of in store manually, as we always have done. And we also collect prices for smaller shops as well, and that's manually as well. So just because we don't have scanner data for some of the retailers, that doesn't mean we're not covering them at all. We're covering them, through traditional kind of methods. Can I just ask, sorry, all the questions are being kind of put into a group chat with ONS colleagues. Can ONS colleagues stop adding questions? Because every time you do that, it kind of jumps around and I'm losing kind of track of what questions to ask next. Thank you. So next question, can you confirm that headline CPI will be minimally impacted by the methodological changes due to groceries forming a relatively small share of the CPI basket? Amy, thank you.
Yes, so I've just presented the impact on headline from our impact analysis covering 6.5 years of data. As I pointed out a few of the observations and our belief as to what's driving those at different times, the overall observation is, for CPI, it was a negative 0.03 percentage points on average during that period. So it's difficult to say what of that impact is from methodology change versus the data change from the grocery scanner data. What we can say is from this analysis, we can see that if you consider 0.03 percentage points minimally impacted, then that is what we are observing. But that will be from a mix of the methodology change and the change to the data and the coverage that provides, and the broader capture that has for the things that I described earlier.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. Next question, does the data delivery system from retailers introduce new cyber attack vulnerabilities? And if so, how are those being managed? So when developing the new system, obviously had a set of security requirements that needed to be met in order to meet the standards that we set at ONS. So those have obviously all been met, and something our previous DG was keen for is to bring in an external provider to review kind of the security kind of processes around the system to ensure that we're doing everything we can to avoid kind of any cyber attacks. So it was reviewed kind of internally and externally. So we feel we're in a good position regarding the security of the system. So next question, will you be publishing any historic time series showing how individual food components would have looked using the new data and methodology?
We have a policy not to revise our consumer price inflation statistics, so I can confirm that we won't be revising any previously published statistics. I don't believe there are currently plans to publish a historical time series showing what food components would have looked like at this point in time, but we'll keep that under review.
Okay, next question. When will the household experience indicator be available? I wonder whether that's referring to the household cost indices.
Yeah, I think so. So I referenced at the start the household cost indices, which are aiming to measure how households experience inflation for a range of different subgroups. Those are available now. We actually publish them on a quarterly basis, and we've been doing that since December 2023. So we publish monthly estimates of inflation every quarter, and that's a 2-month lag. They are still in experimental status or official statistics in development. I think we have an ambition to get them accredited as official statistics, and we do need to do some further work to meet that. And I think we hope to be able to provide some more updates on that in the near future.
So there's another question on the coverage of scanner data. Will you be running the current collection methods alongside the new techniques, while you can only apply the new techniques to 50% of the grocery prices? I think I've answered that largely. 50% scanner data, the other 50% will be traditional data sources and methods. And then over time, we hope to increase the proportion of the market covered by scanner data. And we do have more scanner data in the building that we could use. We just felt that going live with 50% of the market was the right balance, because the retailers that account for that 50%, we've developed really good relationships with over time, and we're confident that we'll receive the data every month and it'll be of high quality. But the ambition is to continue onboarding grocery retailers so we have kind of better market coverage, and then also to use alternative data sources for other parts of the basket as well. Next question. Have you compared actual item level weights from SD with the estimates previously in use? How good were they? I'm not sure I fully understand that question.
SD would be scanner data. So are we talking about the item level weights, what we would have calculated them if we'd used scanner data instead?
Yeah, so I think it's asking historically the item weights that we've used, how robust do they look when we compare them with what's in the scanner data? That's not a piece of analysis we've done. I think because we are calculating scanner data for consumption segments rather than for specific items, it's quite hard to actually get to the same level of data as we have for those item weights. And actually we do have plans to think about how we use the scanner data to improve the measurement of the item weights where we have locally collected data in the basket still. So we haven't done a specific piece of analysis, but we are trying to use the scanner data to inform that.
Okay, next question. An advantage of scanner data is the use of actual prices and spending. Why do you do exactly the reverse with rents, which uses a stock or bath, in inverted commas, of 14 months? This is your area of expertise, Amy.
Thank you for the question. So we do use actual prices in our measurement of rents. We assume that the rent price that we know that a tenant is paying remains the same for a period of time of a maximum up to 14 months. Within that 14-month period, in many cases, we receive an updated price for that particular property. So we use that true price to calculate our inflation measure. So if we revisit that property, we collect that price for that property again, and that stayed the same or it's changed, that counter resets back to zero, and that 14-month period will reset again. We use that 14 months because we consider that that is a reasonable length of time that the rent price is likely to have remained unchanged. This was based on some analysis in the public domain that is around the average length of tenancies. So this is the proxy that we use to estimate the stock. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Amy. Will you continue with steps that reduce index day related volatility, as with hotels, computer games? Is airfares next, and would you consult before changing? So I think I've covered this to a certain extent. You know, we have a kind of a work program to improve kind of more routine kind of data sources and methods that we use within the basket of goods and services, and we'll also look to use alternative data sources as well. Before making any changes, you know, we consult our advisory panels. For example, you know, we take any newly proposed kind of methods and data sources to our technical panel, and we'd also consult our stakeholder panel, and the minutes are available for those meetings, so others can see what's been discussed, and we try and be as transparent as possible with our decision making around any changes that we've made, as we have been this year, publishing the impact analysis for grocery scanner data. There's another question around the 3-week average of data and whether it applies to RPI and CPIH and CPI, which we've covered already. Do you want to come in on that particular question, Chris?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's worth adding actually that I think, yes, the 3-week averages apply to RPI. And in case it wasn't clear, we're using the same methods and approach for RPI that we're using for CPI and CPIH. So in all other regards, it's the same for CPI as it is for RPI as well, and that includes the methodology that Liam described, and how we sort of clean and quality assure the prices as well. And the reasons for that is that that's the most sort of resource efficient approach basically, and we think it's the best approach of measuring grocery inflation.
Thanks, Chris. So the next question, doesn't this confuse the objective of an index of prices? Aren't you measuring the effects of inflation, not inflation itself? So whether any colleagues want to come in on that particular question.
I'm not sure I understand the question fully. I mean, I guess what I would say is that it is a price index, so we are aiming to measure inflation itself. It's a method that's used internationally, and we have developed the method in collaboration with our technical panels and academic experts. So I'm not sure that quite answers the question, but that's how we would see it.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. So what are some of the limitations to expanding scanner data use beyond supermarkets to other sectors of retail? So I think one of the biggest limitations we face is data acquisition. So we need to get access to the data that we need, and that's been a long process for the groceries sector. But as I said earlier, we now have really good relationships with the the retailers. Sometimes market structure plays a part as well. So, for example, if there's something, a particular part of the basket where you have a market structure, something similar to perfect competition, where there are lots and lots of providers, it wouldn't make sense for us to pursue access to data off tens and tens of retailers in a particular sector. Maybe a sample collection would be better in that particular instance. And for us as an organisation, we want to move to using more large administrative data, but I think there'll always be a balance across the basket of goods and services, where there'll be a mix of different modes of collection, and it's about getting that balance right. So you're nodding, Chris. Did you want to come in or no?
I don't mind. I can come in. I think the only thing I would add is that it's I think we'd like to look at sort of new data sources and where we can expand out to other areas of the basket, but they're not always simple solutions. Sometimes just trying to measure a different product area comes with a whole lot of new challenges. We have to think about what we define as a unique product, for example, and lots of questions to work through. So these things can take time as well.
Yeah, for those of you that have been involved in price statistics for a while, changes have been made with unintended consequences, like the changes to clothing. So, we're very mindful as an organisation to make sure before we make any change that we give ourselves ample time to ensure that we fully understand the data before using it in our headline measures of inflation. Okay, next question. Are you applying unit values only at individual item rather than across multiple items?
Yeah, so it'd be at the, just to clarify, it'd be at the product level. So as an example, if you've got a tin of baked beans, you'd calculate a unit value for that tin of baked beans. If you've got that same brand, but as a 4-pack, that would be a different product. So we'd calculate a separate unit value for the 4-pack of baked beans versus the single pack of baked beans. There is one caveat to this, though, that if a product leaves the market, then re-enters the market under a low weight, so it started as a 400-gram tin of baked beans, and then it became a 380-gram tin of baked beans, and they are marked as different product codes. We would seek to link those codes and apply the quality adjustment to capture the change in weight. So the purpose of the unit values is to capture products that are a very specific thing, and where shrinkflation has occurred, link those product IDs so that we can capture the effects of shrinkflation, for example.
Thanks, Liam. That's a very helpful response. Are the changes you're introducing to the RPI likely to lead to it being different and create kickback from those who use the RPI and its links with bonds? This is probably a little bit out of our remit to comment on the impact on kind of bonds, but in the impact analysis that we published yesterday, we've included the impact on CPIH, CPI, and RPI as well. So users will be able to go to that publication, understand the impact that these changes are having on RPI, and how those impacts compare with CPI and CPIH as well. So next question, would you show us what the impact was on lower level indices, specifically food? Amy, did you want to?
I think I did that during the presentation, and the charts that I showed are also in the impact analysis article that was published yesterday. So if you'd like to review that article and the fuller explanation we provided in those sections, that will give you more information about the impact at food level.
Thanks, Amy. Next question, can scanner data be used for other things sold in supermarkets, such as batteries? The answer is yes, we do hold the data, but that's being considered as part of our kind of prioritization exercise and business planning at the moment, so that there is the opportunity there to utilize supermarket data for other parts of the basket beyond what we're currently using it for. So next question, are these 0.02/0.03 percentage points impact additive? If the average annual impact over 5 years was 0.03, does that mean an overall impact of 0.15 pp?
This is sort of yes. I mean, it depends on what the period is that you're looking at. So if we've analysed the last 6.5 years, and the average impact in that time period on the annual rate was 0.03 percentage points. If that same 6.5 years, if that same impact was observed in future, then yes, the annual rate would on average be, hypothetically in this case, 0.03 percentage points lower for CPI, and then that would accumulate over time. That would impact the index over time, but that is assuming that we've got the exact same behaviour in future as we have now. Chris, was there anything you think to add?
I would just briefly add, so we also publish both annual rates and chained indices, right? So chained has an additive effect, but the annual rate indices does not. So in the annual rate comparisons, that would be the impact over a single year, whereas with the chained has a potential additive impact. But the impact analysis showed both positive and negative impacts of the scanner data. So it will just be dependent on the period, like what's happening as to how the index would be affected.
Thanks, Liam. Next question, could you outline your view on consumer/retailer behaviour patterns that lead to the use of scanner data increasing versus decreasing measured inflation? Do you want to give a summary of the differences, Amy, from your article?
Yes, so one of the slides, the first slide I showed, talked about the differences for scanner data versus our existing collection. One of the big ones being the product coverage, because it can cover all products that the retailers provide to us in their scanner data, rather than a sample of, for example, the most popular, like the items that are bought most readily. We've also got that difference in the temporal coverage, where scanner data is collected on a daily basis within the retailers from the shop till, and we can perceive all of that data versus going out and collecting one day a month, where we might miss, for example, in some week there might be some offers on or price change for a product, and if we collect before or after that, then we would get a different answer. Whereas with our scanner data, we have a better sense of what is reflective of the current month that we're interested in. I also mentioned things like the spatial coverage being expanded in scanner data, and how we have capture of additional promotions and discounts types, some of which are available in our existing collection, some aren't, and Liam has covered the difference in our calculations in the methodologies.
Thanks, Amy. Next question. So your chart showed the contribution to change in CPI/CPIH, but not the impact on the item indices. Will you show the item level indices with and without scanner data?
We haven't included that in our impact analysis article, and we currently don't have further plans to publish additional impact analysis within that. We're focusing on bringing this new scanner data into live production in 2 more months. So we don't currently have that in the public domain.
Can I just add as well, I think because we are using consumption segments now rather than item indices, so they're broader in scope, we can't really show the impact on item indices. We don't have item level price movements for the scanner data, so we couldn't sort of do that analysis at that level.
I did mention on my first slide that we did look at some case consumption segment indices level, and that was published in our April 2025 impact analysis, for example, cheddar cheese. So I do encourage you to look back at our impact analysis series we have for the scanner data to look at some of the case studies we assessed then.
Okay, next question. What are the data sources for the weights to aggregate scanner data, elementary indices, and traditional ones for a given elementary aggregate? We bring Liam in on this.
So we use the annual business survey as a means of capturing the weights of our scanner retailers relative to the market. Yeah, I think that covers it. Yeah, we use annual business survey for the retailer weights.
Thanks, Liam. So we're 26 minutes past. Maybe we'll take one more question. Some changes seem to be rewriting long-standing rules as per manuals and international accepted practice. Didn't these need to be discussed before the change? Do you want to cover this, Chris, or do you? Sure.
I can give it an initial reaction. I don't know what long-standing rules are being written, but I would say that we are following international accepted practice. So where other countries have been looking at scanner data and bringing scanner data in, we're using similar methods and approaches to what they're using. I would say we have discussed the changes extensively as well. We've published lots of transformation articles as part of the process. We have engaged extensively with our advisory panels. So I don't know if anything you want to add to that, Mike.
No, I think that covers everything well, Chris. So we're quickly running out of time. There are 3 or 4 questions left. Maybe if I can quickly run through these and give it at least a brief answer to each one. So which supermarkets are you getting scanner data from? Are you including lower price outlets? And then a number of outlets are named. We can't comment on individual retailers. All we can say is that we're covering 50% of the market. We're unable to provide the number of retailers that we are receiving data from. If there are benefits to the new system, why have you not illustrated them as opposed to having told us about them? So a lot of the benefits that we realize as an organization, part of our day-to-day roles in terms of better efficiencies, and processes, and we've tried to get that across in the impact analysis and other publications. Are there contingencies in place in the event that a retailer are unable to provide scanner data? Yes, there are. We have a contingency plan in place, and we have steps that we would go through if a retailer's unable to provide data, for example, imputing if they're not possible to provide data, and that's kind of built into the system, and we've worked with our stakeholder and technical panel to put those in place. And the last one, will you publish price level data, including at regional level? So in terms of the microdata outputs in March, we'll be publishing consumption segment by region and that indices for those. And then in the summer, we'll be doing the same with average prices as well. So the answer is kind of yes. And I'd encourage everyone to read the microdata publication that was put out yesterday, which covers that in a lot of detail. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. We still need to get 100 people on the call. So it's been really good engagement. Hopefully that's been useful for everyone. We've managed to get to most of the questions. As I said, the session will be recorded and sent out early next week. If there isn't anything that we haven't answered as part of the session, please get in contact with us at ONS. There's a central CPI inbox, which you can find on the website, and we'd be happy to respond to any questions that you may have. So I'll bring the meeting to a close there. Thanks everyone for your engagement. That's been a really good session, which we've enjoyed. It's been incredibly useful for us. So think about how we shape our comms in future based on your feedback, and have a really good rest of your day. Thanks all.